Welcome to the Big Fellas Podcast, where we chop it up about all things past, present, and future about the game of basketball. Where facts, stats, and context reign supreme.
That is blasphemous!
Sometimes it gets crazy, but we always keep it real. Get ready to learn from players, coaches, and fans from all levels of the game and see the court in a brand new way. And now, fresh off the sidelines, here's your host, John Hartofilis.
What it do, fellas, and welcome to the Big Fellas Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, JH, coming to you from New York City, the mecca of basketball. Today, I'm joined by two very special guests, two of my most influential mentors, both in life and especially in the game of basketball. Two of the smartest coaches I've ever been around, Adelphi University men's assistant basketball coach, James McCollough, and Junior NBA Nets Coach of the Year and CEO of Super League Athletic Academy, James Pristouris. We've got a good one in store for you today, fellas. Episode number 8, Klay Thompson, the ultimate heat check. James, what's going on, fellas?
JH, thanks for having me on, man.
JH, what's up, man? Happy to be here, man.
Okay, Coach McCollough, just to start with you. Adelphi was 6th in the nation in all of Division II and made three-pointers with 370 out of the 303 ranked teams in Division II. So I'm just curious, because that's obviously you guys are doing a great job of making three-pointers. How do you guys practice for that, and what's your approach for that to look like to get those results in games?
It really all comes down to our game plan of trying to play fast. It's not that we're specifically trying to take a lot of threes, but what we are trying to do is take as many shots in the game. Very similar to like Mike D'Antoni 7-second or less offense. Like we're trying to play in transition. We want to get up and down the floor. And when you start to play fast, there are openings earlier in the shot clock. So yeah, we recruit guys who play fast, and we like to recruit shooters. They kind of go hand in hand.
Awesome. And obviously it's just a difference by 1 or 2 percentage points. And that also comes with the volume of threes you're taking. But Adelphi's 46th in three-point percentage out of those same 303 ranked teams. What are kind of the plans for the future on how you're going to keep on improving on that?
There's not really a lot of secrets to shooting. You know, at the college level, a lot of it comes down to recruiting. You know, we don't recruit guys who can't shoot and try to turn them into shooters. You know, we're trying to recruit guys that can already shoot and make them more efficient. It comes down to getting in as many reps as possible. You know, guys that are shooting 150, 200 jump shots right now, if their percentages aren't high enough, that means, you know, we got to start taking 300 a day. You know, increase the workload, increase the repetitions. It's going to increase their efficiency. And the other thing is we had a lot of new guys on the team this year that are getting used to the system and getting used to playing with each other. So as chemistry continues to develop, the shot selection is going to improve. And I think that's the number one indicator of how we can improve our shooting percentages is by taking better shots.
Yeah, that's definitely a great way to put it in terms of how obviously you have a newer team this year, and with experience, it's going to come smarter shot selection, and the team's going to get better and better every year. When it comes to a guy like Ronnie Silva, who you've been telling me about him for years, he's a high work ethic guy. He was 2nd in three-point attempted, 27th in points per game in all of D2 at 21.6 a game. If you can kind of just tell us a little about him, what kind of it goes like into recruiting guys like Ronnie, and kind of how he fits the mold and the culture that is Adelphi basketball.
I've been telling you about Ronnie since I think before he stepped foot on campus at Adelphi. When, you know, we were still recruiting him before he even signed, I was telling you about how special this kid is. We knew when we were recruiting him that he had some special talents to him. And I can't really cap that off and limit how special this kid is. We knew that, you know, he had an elite burst to him. Extremely quick, extremely shifty, and he's a tough shot maker, which is something that is very hard to teach. I don't even know if you know if there are coaches out there you come across that are able to teach guys how to shoot those shots that guys like James Harden take and make. He's got that natural ability to take and make very tough shots. But the thing that really pushes him over the edge, you know, as a sophomore this year, he already scored 1,000 points in his college career in 2 years, and he got Rookie of the Year as a freshman, and this year he was first team all-conference. And one of the things that's been able to turn him from a Rookie of the Year into a first team all-conference player for us is all the intangibles off the court. He's not only just especially talented, he's a special type of character and personality. He's extremely unselfish. He's always in the gym, not just with himself, but always bringing in teammates into the gym so they're working together. He's extremely hardworking. He's extremely competitive. And it's all those little intangibles that really push his skill set over the top. But yeah, Ronnie Silva in a lot of different ways is a very special player for us.
Definitely. It's a great way to put it. So Coach Pristouris, I just wanted to kind of touch on kind of what is Super League and some of the amazing things you've done so far with them, and also kind of what you have in store for the future of Super League.
Yeah, so Super League is an athletic organization based out of Brooklyn, New York. We're founded in 2013. So basically, what we predominantly do soccer and basketball, but the idea is we obviously want to develop players. But what I like to do is try to focus on the whole athletic experience. So, becoming a good player is one part of your athletic experience, but also enjoying what you're doing and loving what you're doing. And, through a lot of the events we do a lot of trips, overseas trips within the United States. We do a lot of events where the kids get to play on the Barclays Center court, go watch college games, junior NBA leagues. So at the end of the day, my main focus is just getting the kids involved in my program to love whatever sport they're participating in.
Awesome. So kind of within that, you've also done a lot of work with the junior NBA. What does that work kind of look like?
So the junior NBA has been it's been a great addition to my program. Basically, the last 2 years before this year with COVID, I've attended the junior NBA youth conference in Chicago. 1 year I went with Coach McCollough as well. And being a member of the junior NBA, it gives you the opportunity to run some of their programs through your program. So I run a 3-on-3 junior NBA league where we get the jerseys of each NBA team. We split up the kids into teams. They play 3-on-3. Run an intramural league, basically using the junior NBA apparel and also the guidelines given from USA Basketball. So it's a great way for the kids to have fun, but also develop the correct way.
Awesome. And then obviously it was a great honor when you won the Coach of the Year award. I remember I was there at the Barclays Center when you got it, and the GM of the Nets gave it to you. It was a really great moment. What does that kind of award mean to you? And also kind of where do you plan on furthering that relationship with the junior NBA and everything you do with Super League?
For sure, that was a humbling experience. There were a lot of coaches that were nominated for that. And for me to be chosen, that was, that was probably one of the best experiences on my coaching career. So a couple of things I'd like to take from the junior NBA is, like I said, we use a lot of the guidelines for USA Basketball. I really love the way they develop the young player. And a lot of the basketball here, especially AAU world, these kids, they try to develop players too fast. There's second, third, fourth graders, full court pressing, doing things that they're not probably meant to do at that age. And I think the USA Basketball and the Junior NBA does a really good job of progressing the kids the right way. For instance, to lower the basket for the other kid, for the younger kids, there's no double teaming, to kind of give them a normal progression into becoming a good basketball player, a fundamentally sound basketball player. So I kind of want to try to implement that more throughout the program.
It's definitely something that's going to keep on allowing them to kind of experience the game in a way that most other programs traditionally wouldn't have allowed them to do. So just to wrap up on both your coaching careers, kind of just the lessons you've both learned coaching internationally in Greece and kind of what that side of basketball, because obviously it's played very differently in Greece, what that's kind of taught you and what you've brought back here to the States and taught your players here. Coach McCollough, if you want to answer this first.
Sure. As you mentioned, the only way that I've gotten over to Greece is through James and Super League. I've been lucky enough to go over there as the youth basketball coach for the past 3 years. And the game is very different. And I've watched a lot of European basketball. I love watching FIBA games, the Olympic games. The style of play is different, but it's also different at the youth level. One of the things that me and James were talking about the first year into the second year was the team fundamentals, not necessarily individual fundamentals, but team fundamentals. So when we went over there, we noticed little things about individually how guys understand how to pivot which is, I think, one of the things that, me and James talk a lot about here and do with some of our training groups here. American players aren't great at some of the basic footwork. Over there, they definitely are. But more so how they cut, how they run team offense, how they pass the ball at very young ages really stood out to me. It was not that they were more skilled, and even on an individual level, the fundamentals in terms of, ball handling and shooting were not really standing out to me as supreme to, American youth basketball. But they did have a much better understanding at a very young age of how to play team basketball, how to not over dribble, how to pass, how to move without the ball, were a couple of things that really stood out to me and were very impressive at a young age.
Yeah, so to piggyback on what Coach McCollough said, the team basketball there is what really impressed me. What happens is we usually play the same club teams. We'll start off with the younger team and then play with the older team. They all run the same system. They all run it to a T. There's no deviating from what their game plan is. They're just very disciplined and fundamentally sound. The other thing that caught my eye, and I don't know if Coach James might remember this, but the first year or the second year we went there, we went to play a team, Panathinaikos, which is a top club there. And we get there about half hour before the game. The whole team is there. Their team is there. Their coach is not there. But these kids are going through their warm-ups as if their coach is on the court yelling at them. They're going at game speed, getting ready for the game. And to me, it was culture shock. Because I know if I left my team on the court by themselves half hour before the game, there'd be a whole lot of nothing going on. So that really, really impressed me with how serious their approach was.
And comment on that as well. Jade, I coach some youth AAU teams over here. And again, that cultural difference is huge. When you go to these AAU tournaments, all our teams have about 2 minutes to warm up. And you should go to any high, even when you go to, when I go out recruiting for Adelphi, get into about 2 minutes of layup lines. And you should see some of the nonsense that goes on in the 2 minute layup lines. Guys with their shoes untied. It was a couple years ago, everybody started talking about jelly this, jelly that. No one takes a real layup. They go up like this, and they spin the ball, and they brick layups. And to see over in Greece the attention to detail for warm-ups, like Coach was saying, but especially that a coach didn't have to tell them what to do, is one of the major cultural differences over there. I'm glad you brought that up, James.
No, it's definitely great in terms of the difference between obviously AAU basketball, which is under heavy criticism in the States, and kind of what everyone praises in terms of just the way basketball's played in Europe. Okay, so moving on to our discussion about Klay Thompson, obviously one of the greatest shooters of all time. Just more so, I kind of want to ask you guys some questions about kind of the context surrounding his career and whether it's the perception of him by the fans or kind of the on-the-court stuff that makes him great.
I would say with Klay Thompson, I think the interesting thing about Klay is I don't think he's dependent on anyone. I think Klay Thompson he's one of the few star players I could think of that you could put him on any team and he could fit in just fine, regardless of who's around him, who's coaching, who his point guard is. I just feel like he's the type of player that could fit into any NBA team. The thing that really gets me with Klay is a lot of these star players go on to great teams and their role suddenly changes. For instance, Kevin Love, Chris Bosh, when they went with LeBron to Cleveland and Miami, respectively, what happened was those guys went from being star players to being essentially role players, which they probably never should have gotten to that point. I feel like Klay Thompson, he's kind of playing a role player role in Golden State, but essentially he's a star role player, which is extremely hard to do.
Basketball is a simple game, and it's never changed. One person dribbles the basketball at a time. And in our current climate of basketball, through AAU, but especially in the NBA now, what you're seeing is a lot of guys that are ball dominant. And when you have ball dominant guys, the Houston Rockets are a good example with James Harden. The ball's always in his hands, and for the most part, everybody else is spacing the floor and letting him work. Klay Thompson is so much more than that because of how he moves without the basketball and creates shots without needing the basketball. Dependent on Steph Curry, I don't know if that's accurate. You see how hard he moves without the ball, how shifty he is coming off of screens and setting up his defender to get open, and how efficient he is. He's one of the most underappreciated players in the NBA right now.
Definitely, that's great to point out, and how it's not so much that he's dependent on them. They're just a great shooting backcourt, and that's just something that I wish we can kind of remember. They really haven't been the splash bro since KD got there. That was kind of forgotten. But they broke the three-point record for duos with 483. This was like 5-6 years ago. And they followed it up with 484, 525, 592, 595, and then 678 in 2016, which is absurd to think about how you break it with 483, and then you end up getting almost 200 more than that a couple of years later. Klay's one of only two members in the 2 points per minute club, joining Wilt Chamberlain in his 100-point game. Klay scored 2.07 points per minute in his 60 points in 29-minute game. And Wilt scored 2.08 when he got 100 points. So Klay was just 1 point away from getting to 2.1 points per minute. The closest people to that have been guys like Kobe in his 81-point game, getting in the 1.8 range. But in terms of just scoring efficiently in the lowest number of minutes possible, Klay's up there with a guy like Wilt, who played in obviously a very different era. So I just kind of wanted to see what you guys thought about that.
I think it goes back to why I respect Klay Thompson as a player, is that he's efficient. Like, everything he does, there's no wasted movements. There was a game going back. I actually have that right here. I think it was 2018. Klay Thompson had 52 points in 27 minutes. One of the amazing stats about that, and it's nice in basketball now that we're so deep into these advanced analytics where you have different ways to look at the game of basketball. He took 5 dribbles to score 52 points. There's just no wasted movement. And I think that's how, the NBA in general is becoming a much more high-scoring league than it has been in the past. And Klay Thompson's a great example of not just being skillful enough to score that many points, but being smart enough and efficient enough to be able to score that many points in such a small amount of time.
And I think, like Coach McCollough said, I think the key word is obviously he's just an efficient basketball player. He could do a lot with a little, which I think made him the perfect fit with the Warriors, and I think with any team he's on. And the other thing I find interesting is that, especially with the Warriors, KD and Steph got a lot of the praise, but Draymond and Klay were probably their 2 most efficient guys, because whenever they would get the ball, something good was happening, and it was happening without too many dribbles, without too much extra stuff. It was just good, basic, fundamental basketball, and I think that got overlooked a lot with the Warriors, and that's offensively and defensively, because those guys made a big difference, especially on the defensive end.
One of the most important things we talk about a lot at Adelphi, we like to score as many points as possible, very similar to what the Warriors are doing. Efficiency has a lot to do with not necessarily the shots that you take, but the shots that you don't take. And I think Klay and, James's point, Draymond are both good examples of not forcing any shots. Like, they are very particular and specific about the shots that they are going to take. They're not forcing up shots when they have better shots from other teammates. They're waiting for the shot that they know that they can make at a very high percentage.
Yeah, and I think Draymond, a lot of times, especially, not to get off the Klay thing, but he was basically a non-shooter out there, and he could still be super effective with the ball, which I found incredible.
So just moving on, I wanted to kind of touch on a trade that doesn't really get discussed a lot, even though it really would have completely changed the landscape. What do you guys think happens if the Warriors traded Klay for Kevin Love in 2014, which was a trade that was so close to getting done that Jerry West actually threatened to quit if the Warriors pulled the trigger on it? They didn't. They ended up winning 3 championships with Klay after that. What do you guys think happens if they make that deal?
I think you'd start to see not only more out of Klay Thompson, that he would be able to handle more on his own. You know, we talked about him being a second fiddle. It probably would have allowed him to have more individual success and showcase more of his game at the expense of probably not winning at the same rate. But I think the opposite would happen to Steph Curry as well. You'd start to see that without the extra shooting, without another guy in the backcourt who could really fill it up like that, defenses would be allowed to pay a little more attention to him and make life a little more difficult for him. You can't really replicate chemistry. Everybody in the NBA is supremely talented. I think the one big difference between successful teams and bad teams is not a matter of talent. It's really how pieces fit together. So I think that, you know, Jerry West was spot on. You know, when you have chemistry between two players like that, two highly skilled players that can dominate a game, you don't give that up. They were just talking recently, Mark Cuban, about how he thinks he has the next Nash and Dirk in Luka and Porzingis, and how he wouldn't trade either of them for anything. And granted, you know, Luka, I think, is one of the best players in the world right now at a young age. So it's easy to say he's untouchable. As a Knicks fan, it wasn't too hard for us to get rid of him, unfortunately. But the fact that he appreciates that chemistry now and is putting them in the same category and saying both of them are equally untouchable says so much more about their ability to play together and with each other than it does about their individual skill sets.
That's a great point about how when you have chemistry like that between two transcendent players, you just leave it alone. You don't touch that, because even though Kevin Love was a 26 and 12 guy, and you would think that at the time, okay, he's putting up these monster stats, he's the better player. As you see, when he gets put on a championship team, that his role changes dramatically, and that obviously would have hurt the Warriors tremendously had that trade gone through. So definitely a good move by Jerry West in that regard.
And you mentioned before, JH, about Klay playing second fiddle to Steph. But I think, like Coach McCollough said, these guys both need each other. And that chemistry, they both feed off of it. They're both better players because they have each other there in the backcourt. So I think for Steph, it would have been a lot tougher having just an average shooting guard in the backcourt with him. I think for Klay, going to a place like Minnesota, he probably would have been able to showcase a lot of his individual talent, but he definitely wouldn't have had the team success that he's enjoyed in Golden State.
So another what if that's been played over and over again over the last couple of months is what happens if in Game 6, when he has 30 points in the third quarter and the Warriors are rallying, Klay's hot, he's being third quarter Klay, he doesn't tear his ACL and he's still able to kind of produce the level he was producing during that game. Do they win the championship after being down by 3-1 and kind of change that narrative from a few years before that? What do you guys think happens?
I would say, look, I think they definitely win that Game 6 in Golden State. And at that point, Game 7, going to Toronto, I know it's a road game, but I would probably take Golden State's experience in a situation like that. Game 7s are unlike any other basketball game a lot of these guys have played. And I don't think, other than Kawhi maybe and Danny Green, a lot of those Toronto guys didn't have the experience to play in a Game 7 and close out a series that way. The other thing I find super impressive with that Warrior team is how many teams could lose their best player in the middle of the playoffs and still be talented enough to win a championship, which I find crazy that you lose Kevin Durant and Golden State is still capable of winning a championship. And they may have been able to had it not been for Klay going down.
The experience at that point in the playoffs, it's not just unique to the NBA, but you see it in Division I basketball too, those Cinderella teams. When you get late into the season, it's really not about talent. It's about who's playing the best team basketball. And I would argue that it might have hurt them a little more to lose Klay than it did to lose Durant. You know, Durant might have been a more dominant individual talent. But going back to what we were talking about with the chemistry that Steph and Klay have together, all the experience and the championship experience that they already have, I think if Klay doesn't get hurt, you're definitely in for a hell of a game going back to Toronto for Game 7. But if you got a healthy Klay and Steph still, I'm taking the Warriors in Game 7.
Yeah, speaking of that chemistry, James, a big point is Also, so Durant got hurt, I believe, Game 5 in the Western Conference Finals against Houston. And Houston was up in that series 3-2. So they go back to Houston for Game 6 without Durant on the road, which a lot of people basically said, this is Chris Paul and James Harden's chance. They're going to close out the series. And with Klay, Steph, Draymond, with that chemistry they've developed over all these years, they go into Houston and get a huge Game 6 road victory, and win that series. So that was very impressive also.
Absolutely. Very, very much what would have ended up happening in another Game 7 in Toronto.
So just taking it back to draft night 2011, a lot of talk was made about Jimmy Fredette being the can't-miss shooter in the draft. He obviously lit up college basketball. What are the two you think kind of is what made Klay that guy, and it kind of what made Jimmer kind of just phase out after just a very short stint in the NBA?
If I could jump in on this one first, James. I love watching shooters, since I was a little kid. I grew up with nightmares of Reggie Miller. Loved Ray Allen. Had big hopes for Allen Houston, so I loved watching Jimmer. I watched a lot of Klay Thompson too, but Jimmer really set the whole country on fire that year. At BYU, he was shooting with range that guys hadn't seen, filling it up, knocking down shots. I think he was almost a bit, with all due respect, of a one-trick pony, whereas Klay Thompson was just more well-rounded. He was more built for success at a higher level, especially going back to our conversation about, his ability to play off the ball, where, Jimmer was kind of more of a ball-dominant shooter, shooting off the dribble. They ran him off some screens and stuff, but not quite in the same way that, Klay Thompson does. You can't really compare dribbles in a game, for example, some of their big games. They'd be vastly different. But I think Jimmer ended up getting caught not being able to adjust without the ball as well as Klay could. He got caught with a little bit of lack of speed and size that Klay Thompson had. And I think that that's what you get with being a more efficient player is it's less fanfare. There's less attention on some of the guys who end up being more efficient. And I think that it's interesting. So you're looking at Klay Thompson arguably had better shooting numbers in his 3 years. His first year at Washington State, 42% from three, 41% from three the following year, and then 43% from three. Consistently averaging, his first year, 12 points, then up to 19 points and 21 points. But you see, I think Jimmer Fredette's overall scoring numbers is what brought all the attention. There's a lot of guys that are averaging about 18 to 20 points. There's very few who are, what was he averaging his last year there?
29.
29 points per game in Division I basketball is very rare. And I think that has a lot more to do with grabbing attention and media attention, especially, rather than the efficiency.
Obviously, a lot of what Jimmer did, what helped Jimmer was the media, I think he was a great story. The media ran with it, and, it made him a lottery pick. Now, did he deserve to be a lottery pick? I think the only way you can make a case that Jimmer Fredette was a lottery pick, if you think your NBA team could succeed with him running your team and having the ball in his hands all the time, which I think at his size and at his athleticism was not possible. The other thing it touches on is how difficult it is to peg some of these guys as pros. If you look at this draft specifically, Jimmer gets drafted before Klay, which in hindsight is ridiculous because Jimmer Fredette isn't even in the NBA right now. He's playing in China. But Kawhi Leonard was 15th, and Jimmy Butler, another two guard, was 30th in that draft. So it just goes to show you that the whole draft process it's not a perfect science, and there's a lot of factors that go into the success of a professional athlete.
Beautifully put. No, that's definitely a point that lot of people kind of forget about how difficult it is to draft and find a guy as special as Klay Thompson. Moving on to one of our new topics, a replaceability rating. So in a hypothetical scenario, this kind of just like we were talking about what happened with the Kevin Love trade. Is there anyone in Klay's position that if you take Klay off the Warriors, who can kind of step up and the Warriors don't skip a beat? So if there's one guy in the league today that you think can just plug him into the Warriors and they're running on all cylinders the way they are with Klay, Klay would have a rating of 1. If there's 2 guys, 2, and so on. And if no one can do it, Klay has a perfect rating of 0, which means he's irreplaceable to the Warriors. And there's no one in the league right now that you put him on the Warriors and they're close to as good as they are right now with Klay on the team. So who do you guys who comes to mind when you think about that?
Coach James, you remember when JH caught that dunk in Greece? You want to try to
yeah.
We can't have Klay, but we could bring in, the 18-year-old prime version of JH. What do you think about that?
I think that's more relevant.
The listeners don't know that I can dunk, so that's further proof.
There you go. There's your little plug.
Yeah.
So first off, we talked about it before. I don't think you're replacing the chemistry. You could bring in even, some of the most talented players at the 2-guard position, maybe not in the current NBA, but going back through history. You're not replacing the chemistry and the experience that those 2 guards, him and Steph Curry, had together. So I don't think it's easy to replace them. One of the guys that I would be very interested to see how it would work, you're giving up at least a little bit of that elite shooting. But I love Klay Thompson because he's plays without the ball, but he's a 2-way guard. He's an outstanding defender. So I think Jimmy Butler also kind of fits that bill as a 2-way guard with the ability to play off the ball. I think you're not going to sacrifice any defense. I think you're still going to have a similar level of scoring, albeit from different spots on the floor. He's a little bit more well-rounded, or takes shots from different areas on the floor compared to Klay being more of a spot-up and three-point shooter. But I don't think that there's so many things that go into chemistry. Very tough player to replace. Maybe Jimmy Butler, I'd like to see it, but I wouldn't make that trade for him and give up that chemistry. So I might lean closer to that 0.
Yeah, so like Coach McCollough said, the one thing that definitely can't be replaced is the chemistry. I think that is going to be almost impossible to replicate. Now, as far as 2 guards in the league, the one that jumps at me and I think could come to fruition because this guy's always in trade rumors is someone like a Bradley Beal on the Wizards. I think he'd be able to fit into because he's efficient and doesn't need the ball in his hands too much. And he's played with a ball-dominant point guard before, like John Wall. So I think he could potentially fit in that role, but I don't think he would be as successful as a Klay Thompson would. Now, the other thing, and I'd like to get Coach McCullough's take on this. We're saying replacing him with a 2-guard, but what about replacing Klay with a bigger point guard and playing Steph a little off the ball and giving him a Klay-like role where he's coming off screens and driving the defense crazy? How do you think that would work, Coach?
It's an interesting point, James. You may have seen this. I know you've come to a couple of our games at Adelphi. Last year, we had a returning senior point guard, a guy named Connor McGinnis. He was our starting point guard for almost his entire career, ended up breaking Adelphi's all-time assist record. Outstanding pure point guard, very good all around, but he was about 5'8", 5'9". When we brought in Ronnie Silva, we knew how he could score the ball, but he was also a point guard, and he's also a sub-6 foot guard. He's about 5'9" as well. And at our level, a high Division II, we had a lot of concerns about how to play 2 guys in the backcourt that are both 5'9", for that exact, or for a different reason, that they didn't have the size to maybe guard or be as versatile off the ball. But we tried it because Ronnie, as a point guard, was such a tremendous shooter off the ball. That's how he won Rookie of the Year that year. His freshman year, he shot about 47% as a point guard playing off the ball. He's very comparable to what Steph Curry is. He's outstanding with the ball, but because he could shoot it and space the floor so well, our offense was extremely efficient playing 2 point guards in a similar way. So I think, that definitely opens up the discussion when you have a guy like Steph Curry and the ability to move him to the 2 guard. That might be something else that you would have to look at if you're really trying to keep that consistency and the level of wins with the Warriors. If you're getting rid of Klay Thompson, you're going to have to get creative.
Yeah, I agree. I was just looking at some point guards that may be able to play with them. For instance, like a Kyle Lowry, who's a very not a ball dominant guard, makes a basic play, can make the open shot. Drew Holiday, 2 guys that could defend, make open shots. I think it would be an interesting idea for the Warriors if they look to ever break up that backcourt.
I agree, and I've always been a big fan. He's getting a little older now, but Chris Paul is still one of the best forwards in the NBA going back, the last decade. You put him in there. I think we were successful at the Division II level because we weren't running into NBA-sized and athleticism at the 2 guard spot all the time. There wasn't too many guys at our level who were 6'7", 6'8". So I think at the NBA, that would be a problem that they would run into at some point if you're putting Klay at the 2. How are they going to defend? Because in this day and age in the NBA, everybody could really score the ball, and everybody's very versatile. So even a guy like Jimmy Butler, you put Steph Curry on him, I'm pretty sure he's going to look like Kobe Bryant. He's going to bring him down to the low block, and he's going to get high-efficiency shots every single time down. So it's going to be a tough situation to really play those types of lineups in the NBA for the large majority of minutes.
No, that's definitely a good point. What do you think about this one? Because this another – Klay Thompson always seems to be in trade rumors, and he probably will be this summer. A big Klay Thompson trade rumor for this summer is Klay for Giannis, and obviously other pieces involved. But do you think Steph Curry could play with a guy like that? Obviously, size wouldn't be an issue there, but with Giannis being the ball-dominant guy?
Well, I think that that's the way the NBA is going right now. That's why Giannis is such a dominant player. He's right up there with some of the best in the world. You add a championship to his resume, and maybe he does start to overtake LeBron. I think he's going to need that. But the positional fit in the NBA is really starting to change, that you don't really have guys that are locked into one position anymore, very much like Giannis. Jason Kidd was trying to play him at point guard. These days they're playing him at center. He's obviously was drafted as a wing player, a 3-4 depending. I think you could put a guy like that anywhere, and that helps you to move around some of the other pieces. Giannis is something else, the way he affects the game in so many different ways. So if you're telling me you could get Giannis and Steph Curry, that's probably one of the guys that could replace that type of efficiency and chances to win not only enough games, but to win NBA championships too.
Yeah, for sure.
This was great. So
thanks, JH, man.
Yeah, thank you, man. Worked out great.
As we all know, fellas, all good chop-ups must come to an end. That's all for today's episode. Special thanks to James and James for coming on today. They both gave some great insight from minds that have been around high-level basketball for years. I know I loved every second of it, and I hope you fellas enjoyed it too. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Big Fellas Podcast. Check us out on all major social media platforms at Big Fellas Pod to join the chop up. You can also listen to us on every podcast platform on the planet. Stay tuned for the next episode, Big Fellas.